The Atheist Debates Patreon project presents Claims Aren't Evidence? That's correct. Claims aren't evidence. Thank you for watching. We'll see you next time. No, I've said this many times, and there seems to be some confusion because people have come after me, including some otherwise reasonable people, to say, but Matt, when you say claims aren't evidence, claims can contain data and information. Yes, they can, and it's the data and information that is the evidence, not the claim itself. But Matt, you're dismissing anecdotal testimonial evidence. No, I'm not. What I'm saying is that the claim itself under question is not evidence for the claim under question. See, evidence is a very difficult subject for a lot of people to get. Essentially, if you want to say that what counts as evidence for a proposition, first you have a proposition, X is the case. And then you have the facts and data that are consistent with that proposition, with that hypothesis, if we can get that far, and inconsistent with competing hypotheses, including any null hypothesis. Part of this is so that we can get around something that's been called the Raven's paradox. For example, if you were to begin with your claim, all ravens are black. Well, a raven that is black is evidence for the proposition. Or is it? I have a separate issue with the formulation of Raven's paradox because it begins with all ravens are black. And so finding a black raven is certainly evidence consistent with the proposition, but it's not wholly consistent with it because of the word all. This is not the Raven's paradox at this point yet. We're getting to that. And so a single raven is evidence towards the proposition, evidence for the proposition, not confirmation of the proposition, which is fine. And so you count that. But here's the thing that the Raven's paradox tries to address, and that is a raven that is black is evidence for the proposition that all ravens are black. But you could reframe all ravens are black to be all non-black things are non-ravens. That's just the contrapositive. You've essentially negated both terms, which means that if you find any black or any non-black thing that is also not a raven, that counts as evidence for the proposition. And that just seems bizarre. If you say all ravens are black and a black raven is evidence for it, that is equivalent to saying all non-black things are non-ravens, and all of a sudden a red apple is also evidence for all ravens are black because it's a non-black thing that is not a raven. And because it's one more piece of evidence for the claim that all ravens are black, you've got to count them as equal, do we? Is that how we quantify evidence? So a red apple, a blue shirt, a green banana, a yellow banana, all of these are bits of evidence towards the proposition that all ravens are black. And there are people who've tried to resolve this, including doing Bayesian analysis, essentially saying, yes, technically it's a piece of evidence, but once you set up your priors and what's expected evidence, it doesn't count the same as an actual black raven. A red apple doesn't tell us anything at all, really, about whether or not all ravens are black. And it would be generally viewed as silly if somebody said, I'm going to prove to you that all ravens are black, and they do that by holding up it's green screened, but by pointing to their blue shirt. This is not black, it's not a raven, therefore that counts as evidence for it. None of us would find that particularly compelling. As a matter of fact, it might not move the needle at all, even because the exhaustive knowledge required and the exhaustive exploration of the universe to find out, okay, is it true that all non-black things are also non-ravens? You would have to have exhaustive knowledge of the universe for that. So a red apple isn't evidence for the proposition that all ravens are black because it can be consistent with other hypotheses like all ravens are green. All ravens are green, all ravens are blue. Both of those are supported by the blue or the red shirt, the red stop sign, the red apple. All of those are evidence for all ravens are black. They're evidence for all ravens are green. They're evidence for all ravens are blue. And so if a piece of evidence can consistently be used to support multiple different hypotheses, then it's not evidence for any of them distinctly. So you can consider that the claim in question, the proposition in question, could be viewed as a premise and an argument as to whether or not you're going to accept it. But we could look at a bunch of different claims, like Jesus rose from the dead. That's a claim. We could look at Jesus walked on water. That's also a claim. All ravens are black, obviously a claim. This video is terrible. Each of these claims are the proposition in question. They aren't evidence of anything that Jesus did. They're not evidence of what ravens are or aren't. And they're not evidence of the quality of this video. The claims aren't evidence for the claim in question. That's mostly all I've been saying. But I hear people saying, Matt, claims can be evidence. Gosh, Matt, that's all we're saying. You're throwing out all the eyewitness testimony, and claims can contain evidence. Yes. Claims can point to evidence, but in the same way that the map is not the place and the pointer is not the data, claims are not the evidence. Claims can be consistent with the evidence, and claims can contain evidence. But when you say something like, I just got a new car, that's the claim. The fact that you said it is not evidence for that claim. That claim can be accepted rationally, reasonably. And we'd like to even say at face value, we'll just accept that claim at face value. You just got a new car. But that's not true. That's not what we're doing. It's really not at face value. We have a mountain of evidence for each aspect of that claim. We have evidence that you exist. We have evidence that cars exist. We have evidence that people own cars. We have evidence that people get cars. We have evidence that people will tell you when they get a new car that they're especially happy about it or proud about it, or if they're upset or irritated about it. All of those aspects come together to such that when someone says, I just got a new car, you don't need any additional evidence, not because the claim speaks for itself, but because the claim is consistent with the mountain of evidence that you have in your model of reality. This is where we get to this: extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, and ordinary claims don't require extraordinary evidence in order to warrant belief. It's just about what is consistent with the facts of reality. Now, the claim may in fact point to data or a reference, but it's the data that is the evidence, the accuracy of that data, because the claim could be a lie or it could be unintentionally false. You could say 9 out of 10 doctors agree, whether 9 out of 10 doctors agree or not. And so if the claim is 9 out of 10 doctors agree, and it turns out that they do, it isn't the claim that is the evidence, it is the fact, the data. It is the fact that 9 out of 10 doctors agree. Someone could be confused or delusional or inaccurate or lying. The claim requires confirmation because it on its own isn't confirmation for anything beyond someone made a claim, which, by the way, isn't the claim. If you were just saying someone made a claim, well, now you've got a claim that someone made a claim, except that now maybe ChatGPT made that claim and it wasn't even someone that made the claim. It doesn't matter, and I'm not trying to get patently absurd about this, but a claim is the proposition. It can be accepted as a premise, etc. It can be used in an argument for something, but the claim is not the evidence. Circular reasoning is a fallacy where we affirm one of the premises. When we get to our conclusion, we're just reaffirming a premise. Circular reasoning would be to claim that the claim includes evidence for itself, because premise one doesn't make an argument or evidence. Our temptation to claim that the claims are evidence or contain evidence is because we're so good at taking the pile of evidence that we already have about reality and comparing a claim to it such that we don't even recognize we're using external verification. This is why, as I mentioned before, we'll often just say, oh, well, we'll just take that at face value. But its value on its face is only with respect to the actual evidence from reality. That's the value of syllogistic forms. They can be entirely content agnostic. And so you could make a bunch of different claims. You could say, I witnessed Bob stealing a cookie. I witnessed Bob driving to work. I witnessed Bob reading a book. I witnessed Bob rising from the dead. Sorry, Bob. I witnessed Bob being abducted by aliens. I witnessed Bob claiming to have been abducted by aliens. I witnessed Bob claiming to have been reading a book. These claims have the same, roughly, form and structure. Those claims are not all supported by the same evidence in our understanding of the world. None of those claims are on their own evidence for that claim, because those are all claims about what I witnessed. They are the claim. And it's how those claims mesh with the facts that we have about reality that is how we determine their face value assessment, and then determining whether or not we need to investigate further. Because none of those statements on their own contain any evidence at all until the facts can be established. What if it was Sarah who stole the cookie and I was lying? What if Bob's never driven and I misidentified the driver of the car? What if Bob is illiterate and Bob was just pretending to read the book? So the fact that I say I witnessed Bob reading a book is more accurately described as I witnessed Bob pretending to read a book. But I don't know that. And so I report honestly what I witnessed. I witnessed Bob appearing to read a book. And so we'd have to include language like that to kind of include the caveats to make sure we're not asserting the wrong thing. What if Bob wasn't dead and therefore didn't rise from the dead? What if Bob was actually in the hospital and I saw him, but you don't have any way of verifying that state of affairs from the one where I didn't see him? What if Bob was in the hospital, but the person I saw in the hospital wasn't Bob because I was in a different hospital? And so my statement is happenstance correct with the fact that Bob's in the hospital, but it's false when I say that I witnessed Bob in the hospital, even though I don't know it and nobody might ever know it. What if Bob wasn't abducted by aliens? What if Bob didn't claim to have been abducted by aliens and I just misunderstood what he was saying? What if Bob did claim to have been reading a book, but you have no way of verifying it? What if there is no Bob? The claim cannot be evidence for itself. It's only the verifiable and verified data which can appear within a claim that counts as evidence. But it is not merely the proposition in question which counts as evidence. The fact that someone says something, I saw the empty tomb, isn't confirmation that they saw the empty tomb, and it isn't confirmation that the tomb is empty. You can look at that and say, hey, yes, but why else would they say it if it weren't true? Maybe they were confused. Maybe they were lying. Maybe they were honestly trying to convey information. Who knows? Maybe they're correct. We don't know what the correct answer is. And because of that, the reason we don't know what the correct answer is because that claim in and of itself isn't evidence for the proposition, because it's evidence for competing propositions as well, if you were to consider it evidence. The better thing to do is to say, this is the claim. Let's evaluate what evidence we can find that is consistent with the claim to either confirm it or fail to confirm it. And that's the way we go about all of it. Science isn't making proclamations about reality. It's not telling you what truth is. We are setting up models and propositions and either confirming them by evidence beyond the mere proposition or failing to confirm them over and over again. Look into the Raven's paradox if you want a little bit more on that. It's not completely the cornerstone of whether or not claims can be evidence, but it's a fun part of a troubling part of epistemology that from a logical standpoint, my blue shirt is evidence that all ravens are black. And yet, generally speaking, while I could fight with some people who are going to go through various analysis, it wouldn't be the sort of evidence that anyone should reasonably accept. I'm going to prove to you that all ravens are black because I have on a blue shirt. Oh, well, it's just step one in the approval. Then we have to look at every other thing in the entire universe. And it is, at a minimum, beneath anecdotal. Because our general perception of anecdotal evidence is testimony, which we can then evaluate with respect to what we already know and understand about reality and know and understand about that person. maybe the person you're talking to is untrustworthy, like George Santos. Maybe they're a paragon of virtue, like nobody that I know, and yet still could be wrong. The troubling part of this is that when we're talking to apologists and you want to say, look, the story in the Bible is the claim. The story in the Quran is the claim. You need external evidence for it. Their view is very simple. The Bible, for example, is made up of 66 books from different authors. There are different people here who are telling similar stories. And so what you have is not a biblical claim, but a collection of claims from different people. And because of that, when you say, the Bible is the claim, you need the actual evidence for it. They're like, no. This is it. We've put together the corroborated, tales and stories, and that has to count as evidence because all of these people are telling consistent things. If you interviewed all of the people who were at an event, you would take the various stories, throw out the things that are different, and the things that were the same, you would consider evidence for the proposition. And that's true. Oh, no, it's true. You would do that, provided the stories they're telling are consistent with what we know and understand about reality. It's not the claim itself, even from multiple people, that is the evidence. It's how the claim meshes with the evidence that we already have. And that's why I say claims aren't evidence. They may contain evidence. They may point to evidence. They may, in fact, be true. But the way to know that is by verifying the facts and comparing it with what we know and understand about reality and what we can discover about reality. And that's why it's a lot easier, even though it's problematic for some, to just say claims aren't evidence. What the Bible has to say about what Jesus did is the starting point that we can then explore. And the plural of anecdote isn't data. The truth isn't impacted by the number of people who believe it, how strongly they believe it, or how consistently they can tell stories. Because people can be consistently wrong and consistently dishonest. If every single other human being on the planet confirmed to me that they saw George Washington dragged out of his grave, revived in public, and presented to all of us, I would have to say, I will accept that that is exactly what these people think, but I need evidence beyond that to confirm that that's actually what happened. I will fully accept something happened that convinced these people that that's what it was, but I can't merely take their word for it. I believe my mom when she tells me that she's convinced that Jesus is real. I believe many of the people who claim they think they were abducted by aliens or they've seen demons or whatever. I believe they've had an experience. I believe that they are honestly trying to convey it, unless I have evidence to suggest that they are not honestly trying to convey it. But their understanding and their interpretation of what that experience is may not be consistent with the facts. And so to say that if someone believes they've seen a demon, that is evidence for demons, is simply fallaciously circular reasoning and not worthy of the level of debate that we should have for some of the most important questions in the world, like whether or not a God exists. It'd be really handy, though, if rather than just sitting here arguing about whether or not claims are evidence, God would just show up and present the actual evidence. That'd be nice. But so far, hasn't happened. Doesn't mean it won't. But I'm not going to hold my breath in the meantime, and I don't think anybody else will either. We'll see you all next time. Thank you.